Liv Bennett stood in the middle of the Galactic Academy's massive training hall, her heart racing in her chest. The air was thick with tension. She could hear the murmurs from the other cadets, the whispers of doubt, the looks of pity. She was out of place here, a human from Earth, a planet so young and insignificant compared to the alien civilizations that surrounded her. She wasn't supposed to be here, not really. The Academy was meant for the best of the best, cadets from ancient races with centuries of advanced technology, combat skills, and abilities beyond what humans had ever imagined. To them, Earth was just a dot on the map, a place for weaker species, but Liv was different. She wasn't about to accept that fate. She had fought to be here. And now, today, she would prove that she deserved to stand among the stars. Across the room, she could see her opponent, Kor, the Zorkith cadet, the biggest and most fearsome of all the warriors in the Academy. He was towering, with thick green scales that shimmered like armor, 4 muscular arms, and a glare that could freeze a planet. He had defeated every opponent he'd ever faced. No one stood a chance against him. No one but Liv. The cadets had been laughing earlier, their voices loud and full of mockery. A human? She'll never last. She's not even worth our time. They didn't believe in her. They didn't understand what Earth was capable of. But she wasn't going to let that stop her. She couldn't. If she was going to survive, she had to show them. She had to show herself. She adjusted her grip on her weapon, a simple training rifle. It was old by Academy standards, nothing like the sleek, advanced weapons the others used. But it was all she had. It was Earth-made, designed for a world with less tech, fewer advantages. But to her, it wasn't just a rifle. It was a symbol of everything she had worked for, everything she had fought to become. "Cadet Bennett," the instructor called, his voice cold and commanding. "Your challenge awaits." Liv stepped forward, the weight of every eye in the room pressing down on her. She could feel the skepticism in the air, the disbelief, but she didn't falter. She couldn't. She had made it this far. She wasn't about to fail now. The instructor gave a nod toward Kor, who stood across from her, still as a mountain. "Begin." With that, the room went silent. The other cadets watched intently, waiting to see how long Liv would last. Some of them even placed bets. They thought it would be over quickly. After all, Kor had never been defeated. Liv's heart raced. She swallowed hard, her breath steadying as she focused on her target. She wasn't thinking about the cadets watching. She wasn't thinking about Kor's intimidating presence. She was thinking only about the rifle in her hands and the target in front of her. She had trained for this. She could do it. Kor moved first, his 4 arms swinging with speed and power that would have crushed most opponents instantly. Liv barely had time to react as he charged forward, his energy blade raised high. She dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the first strike. The blade sliced through the air, missing her by inches. The ground beneath her feet shook from the force of his blow. Liv's breath caught in her throat, but she didn't freeze. She rolled to her feet, her instincts kicking in. She couldn't afford to hesitate. Kor's next strike was coming fast. She had to think, move quickly. He swung again, but this time Liv was ready. She ducked under the blade, using the momentum to spring to the side. As Kor's massive arm passed by, she saw an opening. Without thinking, she grabbed a nearby piece of debris, a large metal rod, and swung it at his legs. He stumbled, but only for a moment. "Not bad," Kor growled, his voice low and menacing. He regained his footing and charged again, his eyes blazing with fury. Liv's heart raced as she backed away, her mind working furiously to come up with a plan. She had no chance against him in terms of raw strength, no chance against his years of training. But she had something else. She had agility. She had brains. She wasn't going to beat him by brute force. She had to outsmart him. Kor swung his blade, and this time, Liv sidestepped with fluid grace. She used his own momentum against him, sending him crashing into a pile of debris. She wasted no time. She grabbed the rifle again, raised it, and took a deep breath. The shot rang out, but Kor was already moving. He had recovered, and his speed was incredible. The shot missed, and Kor was upon her again, faster than before. Liv's mind raced, but she had no time to think. She ducked and rolled, using the small space between them to her advantage. The tight quarters worked in her favor. She darted forward, weaving between Kor's strikes, each one designed to overpower her, to crush her. But she kept moving, her feet light on the ground, her body nimble and quick. Kor growled in frustration, realizing that his brute strength wasn't enough to pin her down. He swung again, but this time, Liv was ready. She grabbed his arm mid-swing, using his momentum to flip him onto the ground. The crowd gasped, and for a moment everything was still. Core lay on the floor, stunned. Liv stood above him, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. She didn't take her eyes off him. She couldn't. She knew that one mistake, one slip-up, and Core would be back on his feet, ready to strike again. For a long moment, Core didn't move. He just stared up at her, his eyes filled with something Liv didn't expect: respect. "You've earned it, human," Core said, his voice low but sincere. "I underestimated you." Liv didn't respond. There was no need. She had done what no one thought she could. She had beaten him. She had proven herself. She had proven that Earth wasn't just a weak, insignificant planet. The room was silent, and for the first time since she had stepped into the academy, Liv felt a sense of pride. She hadn't just fought for herself. She had fought for humanity, for Earth. The instructor, who had been watching quietly, stepped forward. "Cadet Bennett," he said, his voice still cold but with an edge of approval. "You've done something few have ever done. You've proven that humanity has a place here. But this was only one fight. The real test is yet to come." Liv stood still, the weight of the words sinking in. She had proven herself in this moment, but there was more to do. She wasn't done, not yet. She had only just begun. The days that followed were a blur of intense training, battles, and simulations. Liv's victory over Core had earned her the respect of some of the Academy's instructors and cadets, but it also made her a target. The other cadets who had once mocked her now watched her closely, waiting for her to slip, waiting for her to fail. But Liv wasn't about to give them the satisfaction. She had worked too hard to get here. She spent every waking moment practicing, training, pushing herself to the limit. She wasn't just going to survive the academy, she was going to thrive. The next challenge came quickly. It was a test of endurance and skill. Liv was sent into a combat simulation where she had to face multiple enemies at once. The stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about surviving the trial, it was about surviving with her team. She wasn't alone anymore. She had to learn to lead, to trust the others around her. Her team consisted of cadets from various species far stronger, faster, and more powerful than she was. But Liv wasn't afraid. She had proven herself, and now she would prove she could lead them to victory. The battle began, and Liv's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who believed in her, and for those who didn't. She was fighting for humanity. The first few minutes were chaos, laser fire, explosions, and the sound of combat filling the air. Liv's instincts kicked in as she moved swiftly between her teammates, giving orders, keeping them focused. She knew what to do. She had spent years training for this. They moved as a team, each member covering the other, each one working toward the same goal. They were winning. They were surviving. And in that moment, Liv realized something important. She wasn't just a cadet from Earth anymore. She was a leader. She was someone others could rely on, and she wasn't going to stop until she had proven that humanity belonged among the stars. The final blow came quickly, a single shot that ended the simulation. Liv stood, panting and exhausted, her team around her. They had done it. They had won. But the battle for respect, for a place among the stars, was far from over. The days following her victory over Core were a whirlwind for Liv Bennett. It wasn't just the training that had become more intense. Now, the eyes of the entire academy were on her. She could feel it every time she walked into a room, every time she stepped into the training halls. The whispers behind her back were no longer about her being a human cadet. They were about her victory, about the girl who had taken down the academy's best. The cadets who had once mocked her now looked at her with a mix of awe, curiosity, and occasionally suspicion. Some were still doubtful that a human could truly belong in the academy. Others were more interested in testing her limits. But no matter their intentions, Liv knew one thing: she had to keep pushing herself. She had proven that Earth could stand with the stars, but she hadn't proven that humanity could stay. And staying was the hard part. Alcar, the Nexian instructor who had been both her mentor and critic, stood before her now, his three piercing eyes studying her with their usual intensity. "Cadet Bennett," he said, his voice steady, "your victory against Core was impressive, but the real tests are yet to come. You may have won the first battle, but now you will face real challenges. We'll see if you have the endurance, the strategy, and the discipline to lead." Liv stood up straighter, trying to ignore the weight of his words. She had worked for this moment, fought for it. But the truth was, she was still that Earthborn girl in the eyes of many. The galaxy had a place for the strong, the elite. But could humanity prove it belonged? "Yes, sir," Liv replied, her voice steady despite the anxiety twisting in her stomach. She had no choice but to keep going. The Academy's rules didn't care who you were, they cared about results. Alcar nodded and turned away, signaling that the next challenge was about to begin. The challenge was unlike anything Liv had faced before. This time, it wasn't just about proving she could win. This time, it was a test of everything she had learned since arriving at the Academy. It was a gauntlet, a full-on live combat simulation where cadets would face off against teams of Academy-trained soldiers, all armed with the best weapons the Academy could supply. Liv's heart skipped as she looked over at her team. She wasn't alone in this challenge. She was part of a group now, a team of cadets who had been chosen to work together. The other members of her squad were different species. Rix, the towering, beast-like Argarth, Tura, a nimble, quick-witted Zyran, and Zethar, a member of a species known for their tactical genius. They were all strong, each one more experienced than her in some ways, but Liv knew something they didn't: how to adapt, how to fight from the heart. The gauntlet began with a loud horn, signaling the start of the battle. Liv's heart pounded in her chest as she gripped her rifle, the cold weight of it comforting in her hands. She had trained for moments like this, but as she stepped forward, she could feel the uncertainty creeping back in. The simulation was filled with real danger. The opposing team wouldn't hold back. They'd fight to win, to break her. But Liv was done being the underdog. She was done with proving herself just to be seen as worthy. She would prove her value by leading, by fighting for every inch. She wasn't going to let anyone make her feel small anymore. "Stay close," Liv said to her squad, her voice firm, her words clear. "We stick together, use our strengths. Rix, cover the right flank. Zethar, take point and watch for traps. Tura, stay with me. We'll find their weak spot." Her squad nodded, ready to follow her lead. They moved into position, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty terrain. The landscape was harsh, rocky, an environment designed to test their survival instincts. The sky above them was dark, the wind howling around them. They didn't have time to second-guess anything. Suddenly, blaster fire rang out from the right. The opposing team was already here. "Ambush," Zethar shouted. "Move." Liv didn't hesitate. She ducked behind a rock formation, motioning for her team to follow her. The first wave of attackers was quick, like shadows in the dark, but Liv had trained for this. She knew how to anticipate the moves of her enemies. They would try to flush them out with brute force. She had to outthink them. "Zethar, flank left," Liv ordered. "Tura, move right, I'll take point." The plan worked perfectly. Zethar moved swiftly, his tactical mind already calculating the angles of the attack, while Tura's agility let her slip past enemy lines unnoticed. Liv kept her rifle raised, firing at any movement she saw. The sound of her shots rang through the air, the bright flashes of energy lighting up the dark battlefield. One by one, the opposing soldiers fell back. But they were smart. They regrouped quickly, forcing Liv and her squad to retreat to a more defensible position. The enemy was relentless, and it wasn't long before they had them surrounded. Liv's breath came faster now, her heart hammering in her chest. The pressure of leadership was starting to weigh on her. She had led them this far, but could she lead them to victory? The enemy was too many, too well equipped. The leader of the opposing team, a massive warrior from the Draxian species, stepped forward, his blaster raised. His dark eyes glinted in the dim light as he locked his gaze on Liv. "You're out of time, human," he said, his voice low and threatening. Liv didn't flinch. "You're wrong," she said, keeping her voice steady. "We're not out of time, not yet." With a sudden movement, she ducked to the side, grabbing a nearby detonator from her pack and hurling it toward the enemy's position. It exploded with a deafening blast, throwing the Draxian and his soldiers off balance. "Now," Liv shouted, pointing toward the remaining enemies. "Push forward, take them down." Her squad moved as one, attacking with precision. Liv led the charge, her body moving instinctively as she dodged and returned fire. The Draxian leader fell back, injured but still dangerous. He raised his weapon to retaliate. Liv wasn't going to let that happen. With a burst of speed, she leaped forward, using the terrain to shield her approach. She tackled the Draxian warrior to the ground, knocking the weapon from his hands. They grappled, rolling across the dusty floor, each struggling to gain the upper hand. But Liv wasn't going to lose. She couldn't. She had trained for this moment. Every fight, every moment of doubt had led to this one. With a final, desperate move, she managed to pin the Draxian's arms and deliver a swift strike to his chest, disabling him. The battlefield fell silent. Liv stood over the fallen warrior, breathing heavily, her muscles aching from the intensity of the battle. She could feel the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Her squad slowly approached, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and respect. They had won, they had survived, and against all odds they had proven that humanity, she could stand among the galaxy's greatest warriors. Liv's hands were still shaking as she looked around at the others. They had fought side by side, and now they stood as one. She wasn't just a cadet from Earth anymore. She was their leader. Zethar, who had once doubted her, clapped her on the back. "You did it! You actually did it!" Tura, her eyes wide with admiration, added, "You led us to victory. I never thought I'd see a human do that." Liv smiled, but there was no time for celebration. The fight was over for now, but the war was still ongoing. The Academy had seen her as an outsider. They had seen Earth as weak, but that was about to change. "We're not done yet," Liv said, her voice firm. "The fight for Earth, for humanity, isn't over. We've proven ourselves here, but we need to keep moving. There's more to do." Her squad nodded, understanding the gravity of what lay ahead. They were with her. They always would be. The battle for humanity's place in the galaxy had just begun, and Liv Bennett was ready to lead them through it. As the dust settled and the stars began to shine brighter overhead, Liv's mind turned to what came next. There was no going back now. She had fought, survived, and led her squad to victory. But she had made enemies, powerful ones. The Academy wouldn't forget her so easily, and neither would the galaxy. But that was fine. She had proved that humans weren't weak. That Earth wasn't some forgotten corner of the galaxy. She had shown them all what Earthborn could do. And Liv wasn't about to stop now. She had started this fight, and she would finish it. No matter the odds, the battle was far from over. Liv Bennett stood at the edge of the battlefield, her rifle raised, her breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. The training ground was a war zone, filled with explosions, the sharp crack of gunfire, and the roar of alien cadets clashing in hand-to-hand combat. The mission was clear: survive and lead her squad to victory. But the odds were stacked against them. It was her first real test as a leader. The Academy had thrown her into a live combat simulation, one that pitted her squad of mixed species against an elite enemy unit. The enemy soldiers were tough. Each one was trained for the kind of battle Liv had never faced before. They had the advantage in strength, speed, and weapons. Liv had to rely on her instincts, her ability to think quickly, and the trust she had built with her squad. She glanced around at her team, the people who had fought beside her since the Academy's early days. They were a strong unit, each with unique abilities, but they had their own doubts, just like the rest of the galaxy did about her. They had seen her beat Core, but now they needed to see more. "Liv," Rix, the massive Argarth, shouted over the gunfire. His voice was deep, his body a mass of muscles and scales, but there was no mistaking the urgency in his tone. "The enemy is closing in on the left flank. We need to move." Liv's mind raced as she turned to assess the situation. The battlefield was chaotic, with a blend of alien soldiers and advanced weapons. Her squad was outgunned, but they still had their wits. "Split up," Liv ordered. "Rix, Tura, take the left, Zethar, Riva with me right. We'll hit them from both sides." They didn't hesitate. The squad moved in sync, splitting off and vanishing into the smoke and rubble of the battlefield. Liv knew the only way to win this fight was to stay mobile. The enemy would expect a frontal assault. They wouldn't expect a coordinated attack from multiple angles. Liv and her two teammates, Zethar and Riva, dashed through the ruins of a nearby building, their footsteps pounding against the cracked ground. She could feel the weight of every second as the pressure mounted. She had already proven herself once, but this was the real challenge. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for humanity's place in the galaxy. As they neared the enemy's position, Liv motioned for Zethar to take point. The tall, sharp-eyed alien nodded, moving silently ahead with the tactical genius that had earned him a spot on her team. Riva, quick and nimble, followed closely behind. Liv's heart pounded as they rounded a corner and saw the enemy unit. 4 heavily armored soldiers, each one armed with advanced weaponry. They were taking cover behind a large debris wall, preparing to launch another offensive. Liv didn't waste a moment. "Take them down fast and clean," she shouted. Zethar was the first to move, his speed shocking as he darted across the open space, his blaster raised. Liv's eyes followed his every move. The next moments were a blur, blaster fire, the sharp clang of metal against metal, and the sound of her own breath as she sprinted forward, shooting one of the enemy soldiers in the shoulder, sending him crashing to the ground. Riva wasn't far behind. She darted to the side, using her agility to slip behind a pile of rubble and fire at the second soldier. The shot landed true, and the enemy cadet crumpled to the ground in a heap. Liv moved quickly, calculating the situation. 2 down, 2 to go. But as she adjusted her aim, she heard a new sound, faint but unmistakable, the whir of a grenade arming. "Grenade!" she shouted, pushing Riva out of the way and diving for cover. The explosion rocked the battlefield, sending a shockwave of debris flying. Liv's ears rang with the blast, and for a moment everything went dark. When she opened her eyes, she saw the smoldering remains of the debris wall. Her squad had taken cover, but she couldn't see Zethar. "Zethar!" she yelled, scrambling to her feet and moving toward the wreckage. A voice, deep but faint, replied from the other side, "I'm here." Liv's chest tightened. Zethar was alive, that was all that mattered. She rushed toward him, finding him half buried under rubble but still conscious. "Come on," she said, pulling him to his feet. "We've got this, we'll finish this." With Zethar's strength returning, the 3 of them advanced again, each one taking their position. But the enemy had regrouped, and now they had reinforcements. The odds had shifted, and the battle felt even more desperate. Liv's mind raced as she processed every move. They couldn't retreat, they couldn't give up. Her hand tightened around her rifle, and she raised it again, her eyes locking onto the next target. She was human, small, but she was more than that. She had the ability to adapt, to outthink them, and that was exactly what she was going to do. As the enemy advanced, Liv quickly took a mental inventory of her resources. They had limited ammunition and time. But they had one more trick up their sleeve. She had to lead them to victory. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about making the galaxy see what humanity could do. The battle raged on, the sounds of gunfire deafening as the enemy surged forward. But Liv didn't let the chaos distract her. She was laser-focused, her mind working at full speed. Every second counted, and every move had to be calculated. There was no room for error. She ordered her team to fall back to a more defensible position, a small outpost behind the ruins of a collapsed building. It wasn't much, but it was the only chance they had. The enemy was getting closer, their weapons primed and ready. As they moved, Liv's eyes flicked to the tactical map in her mind, analyzing the flow of the battle. She could see the enemy's weakness. They were strong, but they weren't as fast as her team, and they weren't as adaptable. That was where humanity had an edge. That was where she would make her stand. "Zethar, take the high ground," Liv said, her voice commanding. "Riva, cover the left flank. I'll take the center. We'll hit them from all sides." The team nodded in agreement. They moved into position, taking cover and waiting for the enemy to approach. The first wave came charging at them, but Liv was already prepared. She fired first, hitting one of the enemy soldiers in the chest. The shot rang true, and the cadet went down, his weapon dropping to the ground. "Keep moving," Liv shouted, her voice loud and clear. The battle was fierce, but Liv didn't back down. She led her squad with precision, guiding them through the chaos with a steady hand. Every shot she took was calculated. Every order she gave was strategic. She had learned how to think quickly, how to adapt to whatever was thrown her way. And then, in the midst of the battle, Liv saw something that stopped her heart for a moment. A huge, armored figure appeared at the edge of the battlefield, the enemy's commander, a towering alien warlord. His massive frame was clad in thick, dark armor, and he wielded a massive blade that crackled with energy. This wasn't just another cadet. This was a real threat. "Stay sharp," Liv ordered, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "Take him down." Her squad moved quickly, targeting the warlord from different angles. But the warlord was faster than expected. He deflected their shots effortlessly with his blade and charged toward Liv with terrifying speed. Liv's heart skipped as she raised her rifle, knowing that one mistake could cost them everything. The warlord closed the distance too quickly, and with one massive swing, he sent Zethar flying back with a crushing blow. Liv's breath caught in her throat. Zethar was down. But she wasn't going to let this monster win. Not now, not after everything they had fought for. She rushed forward, grabbing a grenade from her belt and throwing it at the warlord's feet. It exploded with a deafening bang, sending him stumbling back. The moment of distraction was all Liv needed. She lunged forward, using every ounce of her strength to tackle the warlord to the ground. With a quick, well-placed strike, she disabled his weapon. He roared in fury, but Liv didn't stop. She wasn't going to let him get up. In the final moments of the battle, Liv's squad rallied together, overwhelming the enemy with everything they had. The warlord fell. The remaining enemies scattered. The battlefield fell silent. Liv stood breathless, her body aching from the fight, but her eyes fierce with triumph. As the last of the enemy soldiers retreated, Liv looked around at her team. Rix, Tura, and Riva were battered but standing strong. Zethar, though injured, gave her a tired but proud look. They had done it. They had survived. And more than that, they had won. But Liv's heart sank as she looked back at the wreckage. She had led them to victory, but it had come at a cost. The battle had taken its toll on all of them, and the reality of what they had just gone through began to hit. "We did it," Liv said quietly, her voice hoarse from the adrenaline and exhaustion. Zethar clapped her on the shoulder, a deep rumble in his voice. "You led us well, human." Liv nodded, but her eyes were distant. She had led them to victory. But she knew the fight wasn't over. The Academy was not going to stop. The galaxy would not stop coming for them. She had proven herself today, but the war was far from finished. And she would keep fighting, for Earth, for humanity, for everyone who had ever been underestimated. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Liv Bennett was ready. She was a leader now, and she would fight with everything she had. No one would stop her. The dust from the battle still hung thick in the air as Liv Bennett stood on the front lines, her heart still pounding from the adrenaline. The battlefield around her was a sea of chaos, scorched earth, the occasional flicker of energy from destroyed weapons, and the scattered remnants of enemies who had fallen to her team's fire. The quiet after the storm felt deafening, and Liv couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. They had won, but at what cost? The last few minutes of the battle had been brutal. The enemy was fierce and relentless. They were trained to fight as a cohesive unit, their strength and skills honed over decades, if not centuries. But Liv had learned one thing from her time at the Academy. Sometimes it wasn't about being stronger, faster, or more experienced. It was about determination. It was about heart. And right now her heart was pushing her forward, ready for whatever came next. She turned to see her squad gathering, moving slowly but steadily toward her. Rix, the massive Argarth with his tough armor-like skin, was the first to reach her, his body bruised from the fight but standing tall. Tura the Zyran with her sharp eyes and quick reflexes followed closely behind, her face grim but focused. And then there was Zethar, still recovering from the last explosion, but somehow still moving with that calm, tactical precision that made him an invaluable asset. "You let us well live," Zethar said, his voice calm despite the obvious exhaustion. His tactical mind had been instrumental in making this victory possible, and Liv knew that without him, they might not have made it through. "I didn't think a human could do it, but you proved me wrong." Liv offered him a small smile. "We did it together," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced over at Rix and Tura, her squadmates who had fought by her side. Together. But as the others gathered around her, her mind was still racing. Her eyes scanned the horizon, and she knew what was coming. The enemy wasn't finished. They wouldn't just walk away, not after what had happened today. The Academy had its eye on her now, on all of them. She could already feel the weight of the next challenge bearing down on her. "We need to move," Liv said, her voice steady, though her mind was a storm of thoughts. She wasn't sure how much time they had, but they couldn't stay here for long. She turned to Alcar, who had been watching from the sidelines, his gaze piercing and calculating. "We've made our move, now what?" Alcar gave her a nod, his three eyes narrowing. "Now you prepare for the next battle, Cadet Bennett, and you don't get to decide when it ends. The galaxy will test you time and time again, and when it does, you have to be ready." Liv took a deep breath. The pressure was suffocating, but she couldn't let it show. If she did, the others would see her weakness, and they couldn't afford that. She had to be strong, strong for them, strong for Earth, and strong for herself. The days that followed were a blur of training, planning, and preparation. The next challenge came swiftly, almost too quickly for Liv to prepare for. The Academy was relentless. They didn't give you time to rest, to bask in your victory. They only cared about what you could do next, and Liv knew this was only the beginning of what they would throw at her. Her next task was different from anything she had faced so far. The Academy had chosen her, along with a few of her teammates, to participate in a series of leadership trials. These trials weren't about combat. They were about decisions, strategies, and guiding others, a test of her leadership under the most extreme pressure. The thought of it sent a shiver down her spine. She was still getting used to the weight of responsibility. She had led her squad to victory in the battle, but now the challenge was even more daunting. The trials would simulate real-time combat situations, But instead of just fighting, she would have to make decisions, quick decisions that could mean life or death for her team. She wasn't alone in this, but she knew the weight of those choices would fall on her shoulders. Liv paced back and forth in the training room, trying to calm her nerves. The others were gathered around her, preparing for the exercise, but there was a tension in the air. Everyone knew that this wasn't going to be easy. "All right," Liv said, her voice firm as she turned to face her squad. "This is what we're doing. We stick together, watch each other's backs, and stay sharp. No one goes off alone. We get in, complete the mission, and get out. If we work together, we'll make it." Rix cracked his knuckles, his deep voice rumbling with amusement. "That's the plan. Get in, complete the mission, and get out." Liv gave him a small, tight smile. "We don't need fancy plans. We need to stay alive." Tura, always the quick thinker, nodded in agreement. "We know the layout, Liv. We've got the upper hand. The Academy may want to test us, but they don't know what we're capable of." Liv looked at her team. They had come so far, and now they had to prove themselves once again. She knew she had their trust, but now it was time to earn it. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. As the simulation began, the environment around them changed instantly. The terrain was harsh, unfamiliar, and filled with obstacles designed to test their strategy and survival instincts. Liv and her squad moved cautiously, their weapons drawn, staying low to avoid detection. "Stay focused," Liv whispered, her voice barely audible. "We have to stay ahead of the enemy, watch for anything unusual." The simulation was designed to throw them off balance. It wasn't just about combat, it was about making the right calls under pressure. Liv had to keep her mind clear, her decisions sharp. Her team was counting on her. The first test came quickly. They were ambushed. A group of enemy cadets materialized in front of them, heavily armed and ready to fight. They couldn't afford to waste time. Liv acted on instinct, shouting orders to her team as she fired the first shot. The battle was quick but intense. Liv's squad fought with precision, following her orders and working as a unit. But it wasn't enough. There were more enemies than they expected, and soon they were surrounded. "Liv," Rick shouted, his voice strained as he fought off a cadet twice his size. "We need a way out. They've got us pinned." Liv's heart raced. She couldn't let them down. She couldn't let them fail. The enemy was closing in, and they had no escape route. "Hold the line," Liv ordered, her voice firm and resolute. She turned to Zethar, the tactical genius. "Zethar, what do you have?" Zethar's eyes darted across the battlefield, calculating. "There's a ventilation shaft to the left. It's risky, but we can use it to escape. It'll give us cover." "Move," Liv shouted. "Tura, cover the rear. Rix, take point. Zethar, with me." The squad moved as one, moving quickly but carefully, staying under the cover of debris and fire. Liv's mind was focused on the task at hand. She had to lead them to safety. No mistakes, no hesitation. They reached the shaft, and Liv squeezed into the narrow opening, pulling Zethar in behind her. One by one, the squad followed, their bodies squeezing into the small tunnel. As they made their way through the dark, narrow ventilation shafts, Liv couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. They had made it out, but at what cost? They had taken a risk by relying on the shaft to escape, and now they had to rely on their instincts more than ever. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached an exit, an opening leading back into the outside world. Liv took a deep breath and led her team out of the shaft. The air outside was cold, and the environment was stark. The battle behind them had left a trail of destruction, but they had survived. They had made it. "Good work, team," Liv said, her voice full of pride. "We stuck together, we made it out." But even as she spoke, she knew this wasn't the end. The Academy had thrown one test at them, but more were coming. The enemy would never stop. The galaxy would never stop testing them. But Liv had learned something important in that moment. Leadership wasn't just about being in charge. It was about knowing when to trust her team and when to make the tough calls. And no matter what came next, she was ready. Because she knew one thing for sure, Earth wasn't just a planet. It was a force, and Liv Bennett was its warrior. As Liv stood at the edge of the battlefield, watching the destruction they had caused, she couldn't help but feel a small pang of pride. They had survived. But the mission wasn't over. They had fought, and now the next battle was on the horizon. Liv didn't hesitate. She knew what she had to do next. She turned to her team, determination in her eyes. "We move forward," she said. "There's no going back." And with that, they moved on together, ready for the fight that would define them. The silence in the aftermath of their escape was deafening. The distant explosions from the last battle still echoed in the background, but Liv Bennett could hear nothing but the pounding of her own heart. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of everything that had happened in the past few hours. They had survived, but at what cost? Her squad had made it out of the Academy's training simulation alive, but they were battered and bruised. Zethar had taken a hit to his shoulder, Rix's armor was cracked in several places, and Tura was nursing a wound on her leg. They were all hurting, but none of them complained. They didn't need to. Liv could see it in their eyes. They were all pushing themselves as hard as they could, and that was enough for now. But for Liv, it was never enough. The weight of leadership weighed heavily on her. She had led them through the simulation, but could she lead them through the real battle that was coming? Could she protect her squad when the stakes were even higher? Her mind raced as she walked through the narrow corridors of the underground base they had taken refuge in. They were safe for now, but the enemy was still out there. The Academy was ruthless, and Liv knew they wouldn't stop coming for her. They would see her as a threat, as an example of what a human could do when pushed to their limit. They would come after her squad, after Earth, and Liv wasn't about to let that happen. She needed to act fast. Liv, Rix's voice interrupted her thoughts. He was standing at the doorway, his large frame filling the entrance. "We need to talk." Liv nodded, her throat tight. "Come in." The massive Argarth entered, his eyes full of concern. Despite his immense size and strength, there was a softness to him that Liv had come to rely on. He wasn't just a warrior, he was a friend, a teammate, and someone she could trust with her life. "We can't keep running," Rix said bluntly, his voice deep and steady. "We've already pushed them back, but there's only so much we can do hiding in the shadows." Liv's stomach twisted. "I know." "The Academy is relentless," Rix continued, crossing his arms. "We need a plan, and we need to make it fast." Liv ran a hand through her hair, trying to steady her thoughts. He was right. They couldn't keep hiding. They had to act. But what could they do? How could they take the fight to the Academy and make sure they were prepared for the worst? Her fingers instinctively tapped the side of her rifle, her thoughts racing. She had been trained to fight to survive, but this was different. This wasn't just about a battle. This was about survival, not just for her team, but for her entire planet. "We'll need to gather intel," Liv said finally, her voice steady with determination. "We need to know everything we can about the Academy's plans, their weaknesses, and we need to strike before they find us." Tura, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, finally spoke up. "But how? They've got more resources, more power. We've barely managed to scrape through with what we've got." Liv turned to face her, her gaze intense. "I know, but we've already shown them that we're not weak. We've taken down their simulations, we've survived their tests. We just have to keep pushing, together." Zethar, who had been listening quietly, leaned forward. "We've got allies, Liv, the Resistance. They've been watching the Academy's movements. They know things we don't." Liv's heart skipped a beat. The Resistance, the group that had been operating in the shadows, quietly working against the Academy. She had made contact with them before, but it had been a long shot. Would they help her now? Would they risk their lives for her squad, for Earth? "We'll have to reach out to them," Liv said, her voice full of determination. "It's our best chance." The plan was set, and there was no turning back. Liv knew that the coming days would be some of the most dangerous they had ever faced. The Academy's forces were growing stronger, and every minute they spent hiding made them more vulnerable. They needed to move, and fast. Liv and her squad gathered in the control room of the underground base, where the last traces of dust and smoke from their previous battle were still lingering. A large holographic map of the sector glowed in front of them, showing the locations of enemy installations, possible escape routes, and the hidden outposts of the Resistance. "This is it," Liv said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We've got one shot at this. If we fail, the Academy will come for us, and they won't stop until we're all wiped out." Tura nodded grimly. "We know the stakes. What do you need us to do?" Liv pointed to a series of coordinates on the map. "We need to infiltrate this Academy facility here. It's the heart of their communications network. If we can get inside and disable their communications, we'll cut off their ability to coordinate a full assault on us. That'll buy us time to move forward with the next phase." Zethar's eyes narrowed as he studied the map. "It's heavily guarded. We'll need to be quick and precise, and we'll need to take down anyone who tries to stop us." Rix grunted. "I like that part." Liv turned to the team, locking eyes with each of them. This is our chance. We've already beaten the odds. We've fought through every obstacle they've thrown at us. But this mission is the most important one yet. If we fail, Earth's survival is at risk. If we succeed, we give humanity a fighting chance. The silence in the room was deafening. For a moment, Liv could see the doubt in their eyes, the fear of the unknown. But she also saw something else. A spark, a glimmer of trust. She knew they were scared. They had every reason to be, but they were also ready to fight. "Let's move out," Liv said finally, her voice sharp with resolve. "And remember, stay together. No one gets left behind." The mission was about to begin. Liv and her squad boarded the smugglers' ship, the only vessel that could get them past the Academy's security systems without being detected. The ship was old, battered, and far from ideal for a full-on assault, but it was all they had. The journey to the enemy facility took hours, each minute stretching into eternity. Liv sat at the front, her eyes glued to the navigation screen. Her mind kept replaying the mission briefing over and over again. Could they really do this? Could they really infiltrate one of the most secure facilities in the galaxy and escape with their lives? Her thoughts were interrupted by Rix's voice. "We're coming up on the facility," he said, his voice calm but tense. "Are you ready?" Liv didn't answer right away. She wasn't sure she was ready, but she had no choice. The team needed her to lead. They needed her to be strong. She turned to her squad, giving them one last glance. "This is it," she said softly. "We do this together, we fight together, and we leave no one behind." The ship glided silently toward the facility, its cloaking systems keeping them undetected. They arrived just outside the perimeter, and Liv motioned for her team to move. They didn't have much time. The first phase of the plan went smoothly. They infiltrated the facility through a maintenance hatch, sneaking past the outer defenses. But as they moved deeper into the heart of the complex, Liv could feel the tension in the air. The Academy wasn't just going to let them take down their communications without a fight. The real battle was just beginning. "Get ready," Liv whispered, her voice barely audible. "Stay alert, we're almost there." They reached the central control room where the communications equipment was located. Liv had never been so focused. Every muscle in her body was tense, every sense alert. The team set up explosives on the control panel, ready to disable the communications network. But just as they were about to finish, an alarm blared and the sound of heavy boots echoed through the halls. They had been detected. "Move, move," Liv shouted, her voice sharp with urgency. Gunfire erupted from the hallway and Liv's squad returned fire. The chaos was immediate. The team split up, taking cover behind pillars, crates, and consoles. Liv's heart raced as she aimed her rifle, her mind working faster than ever. The enemy was closing in, but Liv wasn't going to let them win. She had fought too hard to let them take her down now. With a fierce determination, she led her squad through the chaos, taking down enemies one by one. Finally, the communications relay exploded with a deafening roar. The room shook as the equipment powered down, and the enemy soldiers around them began to retreat. The mission was complete. As the dust settled, Liv stood among her squad, adrenaline still surging through her veins. They had done it. They had succeeded against all odds, and for the first time, Liv truly believed it. Humanity had a chance. The escape from the facility was a blur of frantic movements, blaster fire, and close calls. But in the end, they made it back to the ship, alive and victorious. The crew was tired, wounded, but they had done what they set out to do. As the ship hurtled through space, heading toward their next destination, Liv allowed herself a moment to breathe. They had won, but the war wasn't over. The galaxy was watching them, but this time Liv wasn't afraid. The Academy might have underestimated her before, but now they knew better. Liv Bennett had proven that Earth wasn't just a planet of survivors. It was a planet of warriors. The hum of the ship's engines filled the silent cockpit as Liv Bennett sat at the controls, staring at the flickering stars ahead. The adrenaline of their mission still buzzed in her veins, but there was no time for celebration. They had succeeded, yes, but the stakes were only rising. The Academy would not take their defeat lightly, and the galaxy was watching. The Resistance had sent them a message, but the weight of that message had settled heavily on Liv's shoulders. She was no longer just a cadet. She was a symbol. "Liv, how are we looking?" Tura's voice broke through the tense quiet of the cockpit, the sharp-eyed Zyran standing behind her, scanning the surrounding stars. "We've made it through the escape route without detection," Liv replied, her fingers tapping the controls absent-mindedly. But it won't be long before the Academy realizes what we've done. We need to keep moving, stay ahead of them. You're right, Tura agreed. We're not out of danger yet. Liv's thoughts drifted back to the mission, the stealthy infiltration, the battle, and finally, the explosion that had destroyed the Academy's communications relay. They had taken down one of the most important facilities in the sector, and it had been a success. But Liv knew they had only scratched the surface. The enemy would retaliate, and when they did, it would be fierce. As the ship continued its journey into deep space, Liv's mind raced. She thought about the faces of her team, Zethar, Rix, Tura, and Riva, and the bond they had formed over the last few weeks. They weren't just teammates. They were a family forged in the heat of battle and trust. Liv didn't just want to keep them alive, she needed them to succeed. But what came next? Liv knew the Academy would strike back. The high-ranking officials at the Academy, the ones who ran the show, would see her as a threat. Humanity's place in the stars wasn't something they were ready to accept. They had tolerated Earth as a footnote, a barely relevant planet that had only recently joined the galactic fold. Until now, the message from the Resistance still weighed heavily on her mind. We've been watching. You've made a huge impact, but your actions have drawn attention. The Academy is mobilizing. The galaxy's elite have taken notice. You're not just a target anymore, you're a symbol. Those words had shaken her. They had made it clear that her actions had rippled through the galaxy. She wasn't just fighting to survive anymore, she was fighting for the future of her entire species. Earth's future depended on her now, and she couldn't let them fail. Liv, Zethar's voice broke her thoughts. She turned to see the tactical genius standing at the door of the cockpit, his arms crossed. I think we need to talk. Liv nodded. About what? We're heading into unknown territory. The Academy will not just let this slide. They've already put a target on us. I know, she replied softly, but we've got one advantage. They underestimate us. They don't think humanity can fight back, let alone outsmart them. We need to use that. Zethar studied her for a moment, his sharp eyes calculating. I agree, but we can't win just by being unpredictable. We need an actual plan, and we need to execute it fast. The Academy's retaliation is coming soon, and it'll be more organized. If they corner us, we'll be outnumbered, outgunned. Liv felt the weight of his words, but she wasn't ready to back down. We've been fighting for so long, we've made it this far, we'll find a way. Zethar gave a small nod. I know we will, but first we need to gather information. There are still things we don't know about the Academy's network, about their alliances, and about their plans for the future. We need to strike at their weak points. Tura joined them, her quick steps light on the metal floor. Zethar's right. We're good at running and hiding, but we can't rely on that forever. We need something bigger, something that'll cripple the Academy's resources. Liv straightened up in her seat, her mind working at full speed. All right, we'll infiltrate their higher command. I've got a contact within the Academy who's been feeding us intel. They've got access to their inner circle. If we can find out what they're planning, we can strike at the heart of it. The decision was made. They had no time to waste. The team quickly gathered their gear and began to prepare for the next phase of the mission. The plan was risky. Infiltrating the heart of the Academy's command center meant they would be going deep into enemy territory. The facility they were heading to was a fortress, heavily protected, with high-level security and few blind spots. But Liv was determined. The Resistance's intel had provided them with a lead. The Academy was planning something big, and Liv's team was going to stop it before it could begin. The ship docked on a hidden space station, miles from the nearest Academy patrol routes. Their only chance was to remain unseen, gather what they could, and slip away before the Academy even realized they were there. We're on the clock, Liv said, her voice steady as she addressed the team. We'll have a small window to access the Academy's central databanks. Once we get the intel, we move out fast. No mistakes. We don't leave anyone behind. Rix, who had been quiet up until that point, spoke. And if we're spotted? Then we fight, but only if we have to, Liv replied. We need the element of surprise. The plan was set, and the team moved out under the cover of darkness. They moved quietly through the halls of the station, using stealth to avoid security cameras and patrols. The tension in the air was thick, but Liv knew they had to keep moving. They were running out of time. As they neared the control room, Liv's heart began to race again. The weight of the mission was starting to settle in. They had faced challenges before, but this was different. If they failed, it wouldn't just be their lives at risk, it would be Earth's future. Almost there, Zethar whispered, his sharp eyes scanning the area. Liv nodded, her grip tightening around her rifle. They were so close. But as she rounded the corner, she froze. A squad of academy guards appeared at the far end of the hallway, their footsteps echoing in the silence. They had been spotted. The team quickly took cover, hiding in the shadows. Liv's pulse hammered in her chest as she watched the guards approach. They couldn't afford to be caught. Not now. "Rix," Liv whispered, "take them down quietly." The massive Argarth nodded and slipped into position, moving with surprising stealth for his size. Within moments, the guards were disarmed and knocked unconscious, their bodies slumped against the walls. Liv exhaled in relief, but there was no time to waste. "Let's move," Liv urged. They couldn't stop now, the mission wasn't over. They quickly made their way to the central command center, a massive room filled with rows of consoles and holographic screens. Liv's eyes scanned the room, quickly identifying the data terminals that would give them access to the Academy's most sensitive files. Tura moved quickly, setting up the hacking device they had brought with them. Zethar kept watch, his sharp eyes darting around the room, making sure no one was coming. "Liv," Tura said, her voice tense. "This is it, I'm in." The terminal beeped as Tura quickly began downloading the data, her fingers moving swiftly over the keys. Liv watched the process carefully, her eyes darting between the terminal and the door. The data was coming through, but it was slow. They didn't have much time before the Academy's forces realized what was happening. The countdown was ticking. "Almost done," Tura said, her voice strained. Liv's nerves were at their limit. They had come so far, she couldn't let it end now. Suddenly, a loud alarm blared through the station. Liv's heart skipped a beat. "Get ready," she shouted, grabbing her rifle and raising it to the ready. "They've found us." The door to the command room burst open, and a squad of heavily armed Academy soldiers poured in. Liv's squad immediately took cover, returning fire. The battle had begun. The sound of gunfire echoed through the room as Liv and her team fought back against the Academy's forces. The walls shook with the impact of explosions, and the air was thick with smoke. Liv's heart pounded as she moved quickly, firing at the enemy as she gave orders. "Zethar, take the left, Rix, cover the right," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. They moved like a well-oiled machine, each member of the team knowing their role. Liv's rifle was steady in her hands, and she didn't hesitate. Every shot counted. Every decision mattered. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours, but finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the last of the enemy soldiers fell. The room fell silent again, save for the sound of labored breathing. "Liv, we did it," Tura said, her voice filled with relief. Liv lowered her rifle, her body shaking from the intensity of the battle. They had won. The data was secure, but the fight wasn't over yet. The Academy would keep coming, and they would keep fighting. The team gathered around her, their faces grim but proud. "We've done what we set out to do," Liv said, her voice steady. "But the real battle is still ahead. We have to keep pushing for Earth, for humanity." And with that, Liv Bennett knew there was no turning back. They had sparked something, and it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The quiet hum of the ship's engines was all that filled the air as Liv Bennett sat in the cockpit, staring out into the infinite darkness of space. The stars glimmered softly, a beautiful, calming sight, but it only served to deepen the weight on her heart. They had just completed one of the most dangerous missions she had ever faced. They had taken down a major Academy facility, crippled their communications, and stolen vital intel. It had been a hard-fought victory, but she knew it was only the beginning. The Resistance had been their ally for this mission, but now they were alone. The Academy wouldn't forget what they had done. Liv had expected retaliation, but she didn't know how soon it would come. She couldn't afford to underestimate the enemy. "Liv," Zethar's voice broke through her thoughts, bringing her back to the present. She turned to find him standing at the doorway of the cockpit, his eyes shadowed with the same quiet intensity that had always defined him, the tactical genius of her squad. "We need to talk." Liv looked up from the controls and nodded. "About what?" "About what comes next." Zethar's voice was steady, but there was an edge of urgency in it. "The Academy won't let this slide. We've done enough to get their attention, but now we need a real plan. The Resistance can't hold the line forever. We're going to have to do more than just survive." Liv swallowed hard. She knew what he was saying was true. But she also knew that taking the fight to the Academy was risky, dangerous beyond anything they had faced so far. The galaxy's most powerful institution wouldn't fall easily. She wasn't naive enough to think this fight would be over just because they had dealt the Academy a blow. The galaxy's watching us, Liv said quietly, more to herself than to Zethar. We've made a statement, but we can't afford to stop, not now. Zethar stepped into the cockpit, standing beside her. Exactly, and we need to use this moment to strike while we can. We're not going to get another chance. Liv nodded, though her mind was racing. The choice was clear. They had to take the fight to the Academy. But how? The next few days were a blur of preparations. Liv and her team spent their time analyzing the intel they had gathered, trying to piece together the Academy's next move. They knew the Academy would retaliate, but what would that look like? Would it be an all-out assault on Earth, or would they focus on dismantling the resistance and cutting off the humans from their allies? Liv stared at the map of the galaxy displayed on the holographic screen, tracing her finger over the systems the Academy had targeted in the past. The more she studied it, the more she realized that the Academy wasn't just interested in dominating Earth. They wanted to make an example of them. They wanted to show the galaxy that humans couldn't stand up to them, and that made Earth their next target. We have to stop them before they can act, Liv said, her voice firm. We need to take down their command center, their leadership. Zethar nodded from across the room. I've been analyzing their fleet movements. They're preparing for something big. If we don't take action soon, they'll have enough resources to wipe out everything we've built. The others had gathered around the table, listening intently. Rix, his massive form looming in the corner, grunted in agreement. We can't wait. We'll fight until the end, but we need to hit them where it hurts. Liv turned to her squad, her expression set with determination. We don't have much time, but I know how to strike back. We hit their leadership. We take out their commanders, the ones who give the orders. If we cripple their chain of command, we can disrupt their ability to respond. It's a risk, but it's our best shot. Tura spoke up, her voice steady despite the fear that lingered in her eyes. We'll need to gather more intel, get close to their high command without being detected. That's not going to be easy. It won't be easy, Liv agreed, but we're not doing this to make it easy. We're doing it to survive. The squad was silent for a moment, but Liv could see the fire in their eyes. They had already faced the impossible. They had made it this far, and now they had to go one step further. She could feel their determination, their loyalty to her and to Earth. We'll do this together, she said, her voice carrying the weight of their shared goal. We can take them down. A few days later, Liv, team was on the move again. They had made contact with the Resistance once more, securing their support and gaining access to more intel about the Academy's command center. The plan was simple. Infiltrate one of the Academy's outer facilities, gather intelligence on the high command, and neutralize the key targets before they could launch their final offensive. The plan was risky, no, it was dangerous, but it was their only chance. If they didn't take action now, they wouldn't have a future. As the ship made its way through the cold expanse of space, Liv stood by the window, watching the stars drift by. The quiet of space was peaceful, but it only reminded her of the uncertainty that loomed ahead. They were heading toward enemy territory. This could be their last chance to make a difference. She couldn't afford to let her squad down. Liv, Tura's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to find the Zyran cadet standing beside her, her expression thoughtful. Are you sure about this? Liv met her gaze. I have to be. Tura nodded, but Liv could see the worry in her eyes. They all had doubts. But that was the burden of leadership. She was responsible for them, for Earth. She couldn't afford to be anything less than confident. All right, team, Liv said as she walked to the front of the ship, gathering the others around her. We're about to hit their facility. Stay sharp and follow the plan. We get in, get the intel, and get out. No mistakes. Each of them nodded, their expressions serious. There was no fear in their eyes, only resolve. They had come this far together, and now they were going to finish it together. The mission had gone smoothly so far. They had infiltrated the facility, using the Resistance's intel to avoid detection. Liv and her squad moved quickly through the corridors, their weapons ready. Each step brought them closer to their objective, and Liv's heart beat faster with every turn. She knew the Academy would be waiting for them. They always were. Finally, they reached the central command room. Liv didn't hesitate. She knew what they had to do. On my mark, Liv said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. We breach the door, take out the guards, and neutralize the high command. Tura moved first, hacking into the door's security system while Zethar kept watch. Rix, ever the force of nature, stood ready to charge. Liv took a deep breath and prepared for the chaos that was about to unfold. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and they stormed into the room. The enemy was waiting. The high-ranking officers of the Academy's command center were seated at long tables, their eyes widening in surprise as the team entered. Liv's squad immediately went into action. Tura took cover and fired, while Zethar moved quickly, neutralizing the nearest officers. Rix charged forward, his immense strength sending one of the enemies flying. But the battle wasn't over. The leader of the Academy's forces, a tall, imposing figure from the Vraxian species, stepped forward, his blade glowing with energy. He was a warrior, and he was here to stop them. Liv didn't hesitate. She fired first, her shot hitting the Vraxian leader square in the chest. He staggered back, but the armor protected him. He raised his blade, ready to retaliate. But Liv was faster. She ducked low, using her small frame to her advantage, and lunged forward, her rifle pointed directly at his head. In the split second before he could react, Liv pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing in the command room. The Vraxian leader fell. The room went silent. Liv's heart was pounding, but there was no time to celebrate. The battle was far from over. But as the rest of the enemy soldiers surrendered, Liv felt a sense of triumph she had never known before. They had done it. They had taken the fight to the heart of the Academy, and they had won. As the smoke cleared and the dust settled, Liv stood in the center of the room, her rifle still in her hands, her body exhausted but triumphant. Her squad had completed the mission. They had struck at the heart of the Academy and crippled their command. The galaxy had been watching them, waiting for them to fail. But they had shown that Earth was more than just a planet to be ignored. They had proven that humanity had a place among the stars, and they had done it together. Liv turned to her team, her heart swelling with pride. "We did it," she said, her voice full of quiet joy. "We fought, we won, and we've shown the galaxy who we are." Zethar nodded, his usual calm demeanor now laced with pride. "We fought for something bigger than ourselves." Liv smiled, but she knew there was more to do. The war wasn't over. But for the first time, she felt like they had a fighting chance. And with that, she knew humanity wasn't just a footnote. It was a force to be reckoned with. And together, they would prove it.